The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. This is a famous quote from Henry David Thoreau. I've seen this so many times in my life, and I've even been there myself. Maybe you're in a place where you know what you want in life. You know, maybe you want to get married. Maybe you want to have children. Maybe you want to be at a certain financial level, a certain income level. You want a dream job that you're not quite there yet. Maybe you're working in a job you hate and you have an idea of what field you'd like to go into. Or maybe you're just feeling stuck and sad and unfulfilled and you don't know what direction you'd like to go in. If you are feeling sad and hopeless, it's probably because you don't see a way out. You don't see a path to get you to that dream life or the goal that you ultimately desire. If instead of sad, you're actually feeling anxious, just kind of uneasy, uncertain, and constantly in that middle ground, it's very possibly because you have too many options, not because you don't see a way out, but you see multiple ways out and you don't know which one to take. You don't know which is the best choice for you. Either way, you're stuck and you might be feeling like you're living a life of quiet desperation. Maybe nobody knows this. Maybe nobody knows your struggle. Today, we're going to talk about how to get unstuck out of that situation. I remember during my 4 years of active duty as an infantry officer in the Army, feeling both of these ways. Early in my career, I remember after getting out of Ranger School and going on my deployment and coming back from the deployment, I still had about a year and a half left on my contract and I quite literally was stuck. I was sad. I was disappointed to still be in. I knew that I had kind of hit most of my goals. I wanted to go out and live my life. I didn't want to miss more time, like the 6 months almost that I missed while I was in Ranger School, or the 6 months that I missed of my life while I was on deployment. And things just continue to happen here in the life of my friends, family members, all of that while I was gone. I didn't want that anymore. So I had a deep sadness because I did not see a way out of my current predicament. Then, as I got closer and closer to actually getting out of the Army, I felt the opposite. I started to feel the anxiety of I could literally go and do anything I want. I could have any career that I want. Not any career. I couldn't go be a doctor or a lawyer the next day, but the world was mine as far as so many different opportunities, so many different options to apply to try out, to go see what state I was going to live in, what city I was going to live in. I could live in a different country if I wanted to. There was really just an abundance of options, so many different ways I could go. And I started to apply to all these different jobs, started getting job offers. It's like, man, what do I do? What do I want to go do? Do I want to go be a project manager in Atlanta, Georgia? Do I want to go work for a Catholic church up in Maryland? Do I want to go take this job opportunity in Cincinnati? Do I want to move across the country to California? Should I go spend 6 months in Costa Rica? There was just endless options. And while I obviously successfully navigated that time in my life, it continues to happen. There's times in life and family life and my professional life where I feel stuck and unsure of what to do. And I feel a sense of sadness from that. And there's also times where it comes where I have so many options, so many things that I can do. And I feel anxiety about knowing which option to take. And this struck me in a particular way recently as I was listening to an Alex Hormozy video, and he said this. He said, sadness comes from a lack of options and feels like hopelessness. Anxiety comes from too many options, but a lack of priorities, and therefore it feels like paralysis. He says the solutions are as follows. You solve sadness with knowledge, and you solve anxiety with decision and action. And this is exactly what happened to me in my life. One of the things that helped with the sadness when I was in the Army was starting to figure out, okay, what kind of things could I do? I obviously can't get out any earlier than I can get out. I do have to deal with that. There's a certain reality there, and I can learn and read about other people who felt stuck in situations and made the most of them. Things like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That book really helped me through a lot of my time in the Army, especially my deployments and difficult trainings. But then on the other side of it, when you have anxiety, you have to deal with that by clarifying your priorities and making decisions, taking decisive action, not just making decisions, but taking actions. Priorities determine your decisions, determine your actions, and you have to go through all three steps. So to give you a very clear example of how I did this as I was getting out of the Army, I had all these job opportunities, job offers, options across different states. And I basically created a grading scale for each job opportunities that came across. And I ranked them by 4 main criteria. I had job satisfaction, the location that I would live in, my work-life balance that would be provided to me, and the salary that they were offering to pay me. These 4 things became my guideposts as I was weighing and really comparing different decisions, different opportunities that I had at the time. So I'd rank things from 1 to 10. What I started to see was that typically if a job was a 10 in one area, it ended up being a 2 in another. For example, if they were willing to pay me the higher end of the wage scale that I was kind of earning at the time, then it's typical or common that I was going to have a lower work life balance. I was going to be at work for longer hours, have less time off, less control of my day. On the other end, when I had really great work life balance, I was offered a much lower salary. Now, location kind of varied. I had different good opportunities and bad opportunities in different locations. And the job satisfaction also varied. But obviously, the goal was something that would be kind of an 8 across the board, where I'd like where I live, I'd be happy with my job, I'd be happy with my salary, and I wouldn't be miserable with the work life balance that it provided me. Also, had a great video recently on work life balance. You should go and check that out on our YouTube channel. You can start to see how all of this started to help me to navigate these options, these choices that I had. Another great Hormozy quote that I love is that anxiety is unfocused fear. It's when we have this general fear, we don't even know what we're afraid of. Again, it can come from having too many options, but it can also come from just the fear that comes with a change that's coming down the pipe, and we don't know what's going to happen, what the change is going to look like, and we just have this kind of general fear. This is where the devil likes to keep us, because then he keeps us anxious, keeps us feeling bad, keeps us stressed out, and he doesn't allow you to be the best version of yourself. So one of the best solutions for this is to write out your worst case scenario. Write it out. Sit down and say, okay, I'm nervous. I'm anxious about getting out of the army. I'm anxious about graduating from college. I'm anxious about getting married, having a family, whatever the thing might be. Write down what is your actual worst case scenario. I've loved this. I've done this for many years in my life, not usually writing it down, but I do at least play it out in my head to say, okay, I'm nervous about having this conversation with my dad, with a loved one, with my wife. I'm nervous about having a child. Well, what is the actual worst case scenario? What am I most afraid of? What would be my last pick of all the scenarios that I could choose from? What would be my actual last choice? If I have to have this hard conversation with my boss, what is the worst case scenario? If I'm in a toxic work situation and I'm trying to put up some boundaries, maybe the worst case scenario is that I get fired. Well, I'd probably get a severance package if I got fired. And if I got fired, I'd have a few months to figure out what I wanted to do next. I'd have time for clarity. Maybe I'd have time to travel. Maybe I'd have time to go home and visit my family, to recenter, get myself back in order, especially if I've been in a toxic work environment for a while. Maybe I actually feel a little bit better, and I'll have the opportunity to search and seek out new job opportunities. Because that's my fear, maybe I'm afraid of finding a new job afterwards. Why don't I go ahead this weekend and update my resume just so I can feel a little bit more confident if I have this conversation and it goes poorly on Monday? It gives me a little bit of peace to say, okay, if I have this worst case scenario, one, I get to see that my worst case scenario usually isn't nearly as bad as it is when it's blurry in my mind. Two, I get to actually create a plan of what I'll do if that worst case scenario happens. And three, I can make choices and I can take action on actually progressing towards that plan, setting myself up for success. I have to go to that worst case scenario plan. You can see how this kind of vaguely follows that framework of priorities, decision, and action. It allows me to see that even in that worst case scenario, I still think that it's worth it to have this decision. That helps me to clarify my priorities. It's worth this. This suffering has gone on long enough that it's worth having a hard conversation that might lead to me getting fired, even though I think that's an unlikely scenario. Next, it helps me and forces me into making decisions. What would I do? Let's play that out. Let's live it out in my mind. What would I do if that was the circumstance? If my boss snaps back at me and tells me I'm fired, how would I react? I can write out a plan of what I would do. And then next, I can actually take action. I can actually do some of the first steps there in that plan. I can ask a friend if I'm going to be evicted or if I'm in some type of difficult situation, would I be able to stay with you if something really bad happened to me in my life? And I can actually start to feel more comfort because I can seek out my backup plans and options. This is why Tim Ferriss says it's better to define your fears than to define your goals. I think it's good to do both. It's good to define your goals, but then you also should name your fears. You should look at the goals that you have and say, what is it that I'm actually afraid of in pursuing this? What is giving me anxiety, giving me fear, making me uneasy about pursuing this goal? Seneca, the famous Stoic philosopher, once said that we suffer more in our imagination than in reality. And that's so true. And it's increasingly common for young adults in our country. In 2023, according to the CDC, 42% of adults aged 18 to 29 report symptoms of anxiety or depression. And the number one reported feeling for young men is feeling overwhelmed. And so these tools can be extremely helpful in actually helping you to practically address that feeling of feeling overwhelmed. When you feel like there's too much on your plate, you're overburdened, you don't know which decision to make. I find that my greatest anxiety comes from when I don't have a clear path forward, when I don't have decisions made, when I don't know my priorities and what's most important to me. And then conversely, or on the other side of that, following along that path is I have a lot of anxiety and stress when I'm not living according to those priorities, when I'm not actually making time for my prayer life, for my physical health, for my relationships, for things that matter most to me. I love making these videos. I love podcasting and content and coaching young men. It means a lot to me. It is something that fuels me and gives me passion and purpose in life. And so when my time's getting picked apart by all these time vultures in my life, all these people who want me to do a bunch of things that aren't ultimately important, aren't driving my primary motivators, my primary purpose in life, then I start to feel stress and anxiety from that. What a lot of young people don't understand is that stress and anxiety are part of life. What you need to learn is how to cope with them, not how to try to avoid them in your life. And this is especially true for you young men out there, that you're not going to avoid anxiety and stress unless you avoid all responsibility. And if you do that, you're going to be more helpless, hopeless, and in despair than you ever would be if you just had to deal with the anxiety and stress that comes from embracing the responsibility that you were actually created for carrying. So today, I don't want you to just watch this video. I don't want you to just listen to this podcast episode. I want you to do something about it. I want you to take 10 minutes today and write out what's making me most anxious. Where do I have too many options, feel uncertain, or have unfocused fear in my life? And maybe take some time to actually write it out. Name those fears attached to each one of your goals and the things that are preventing you from becoming the man that you were created to be. Secondly, I want you to write out what's making you sad, what's causing you to feel hopeless, and where can you gain more knowledge and wisdom that's going to help you to deal with that or cope with that situation. There's a lot more to get into on this issue. I've done some Q&A on this before, and so I have some of those questions that I'm going to get into in next week's episode. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, follow along to the podcast so that you don't miss future episodes on this topic. I know there's lots of questions of, I have real problems, real anxiety, real stress. I don't know how to set priorities when everything feels so important to me. I don't know how to deal with this feeling of overwhelmed. I'm going to get more into that next week in our next episode. So be sure to follow along, subscribe, like this video so that you see more Seeking Excellence content. If this was helpful, leave a comment below and send this to a friend of yours who you know has been dealing with some stress or anxiety, which really could be any man in your life, any woman in your life that's under the age of 35, because all of us are feeling stressed and overwhelmed at one point or another. This will be a blessing to them. I hope it was a blessing to you. God bless you. It's time for you to go out there and be your best.